Life. Ah, what a mystery. From the smallest bacterium to the largest whale, life is a force to be reckoned with. But what exactly is it? What makes something alive? Well, that's a question that has puzzled scientists and philosophers for centuries. At its core, life is about change, about growth, and about the constant struggle for survival. Living things are defined by their incredible ability to adapt. They evolve over time, responding to the challenges and opportunities presented by their environments. But there's another key ingredient to life's recipe: reproduction. Whether it's a single cell dividing in two or a pair of birds raising their chicks, life has an innate drive to create more life. This drive is written into the very fabric of our being, encoded in the long, winding strands of DNA that hold the blueprints for every living organism. It's a story told in every seed scattered by the wind, every egg nestled in a nest, every newborn taking its first breath. And what a story it is. The sheer diversity of life on our planet is mind-boggling. From the Arctic to the Amazon, life thrives everywhere. Each species a unique masterpiece of evolution. Think about the dance of a hummingbird, the hunt of a lion, or the growth of a giant redwood. Every species has its own story and adaptations. This variety is a testament to evolution. So buckle up for a journey into the wild world of biology. A biologist's primary lens of investigation when looking at the evolution of life is how life replicates. So we shall begin from there. I had recently stumbled upon a PBS crash course series on biology, which included a video on gender theory. Now I have avoided going too much into this topic, mostly because if I do, I want to give a strong metaphysics critique and avoid the political debates and/or trying to make dry analyses of research studies interesting to a viewer. However, seeing PBS cover it kind of moved me to push back a little from a biological standpoint. First of all, because I respect Crash Course, I generally like their content and think they have some good teachers like John Green. I believe in what they are doing and admire their work. Secondly, and more importantly, because of how directed their content is to kids. This stuff is an intro to biology, and so made for 5th to 6th grade level kids. Those just entering puberty and maybe sex ed. I have worked in elementary education and had kids at this age already starting to talk about identifying as the opposite sex and requesting to be called names from the opposite gender. It is particularly egregious for Crash Course to do this in a biology series because the lens through which biology looks at sex is as stated earlier: evolution and reproduction. Gender theory is not a model of sexuality which is concerned with reproduction. Crash Course presents a social constructionist model of sexuality in a series on biology. Whatever one thinks of gender theory, it is first off a theory, but more importantly, it's not a theory of biology, it's a theory of sociology. Sexuality can be looked at from various disciplines. We can look at it medically, such as how to fix erectile dysfunction or increase libido. We can look at it artistically, what is tasteful, erotic, and what is obscene or pornographic. When we look at sexuality through the lens of biology, we look at what is reproduction. Biology doesn't, for instance, investigate the cultural norms of 13th century courtship. A historian would look at sexuality from that perspective. What I would also like to address in this analysis is a much broader issue about sexuality, that we have competing models of human sexuality, and that gender theory is one such competing theory of sexuality. A model of sexuality which is implicit in its claims about gender, and one which, because it is implicit, when it is presented to the more simple, inexperienced minds of pubescent teens, is subversive. They are talking about the nature of sexuality without sustaining any of their presuppositions, and so doing clandestine sex ed, where a model of sexuality is left unsaid but is being presented as the scientific consensus of sexuality, which it is not. I do not plan here to address gender theory head-on, but only to present an essay on why it has no place in biological education any more than biblical creationism does. Gender theory. A paradigm of sexuality has been striving to force a paradigm shift that looks at sexuality less as a biological principle and more as a malleable, non-reproductive behavior. Our understanding of biology has been undergoing some significant subversion by ideas formulated in completely different fields, in much the same way that creationism would be imported from theology. And in the same way, we need not disprove creationism or gender theory. One is free to hold these theories. The issue is these are not biological theories developed by biological methods, using biological data and based on biological principles. So let us investigate the principles of biology. Biology investigates the variety of life in order to understand what life is. Let's begin with a definition of biology as a science.
Biology. The study of living organisms divided into many specialized fields that cover their morphology, physiology, anatomy, behavior, origin, and distribution.
The etymology of biology is derived from the Greek words bios, meaning life, and logos, meaning study. Britannica states biology is the
study of living things and their vital processes. The field deals with all the physico-chemical aspects of life. The modern tendency toward cross-disciplinary research and the unification of scientific knowledge and investigation from different fields has resulted in significant overlap of the field of biology with other scientific disciplines. Modern principles of other fields, chemistry, medicine, and physics, for example, are integrated with those of biology in areas such as biochemistry, biomedicine, and biophysics. Biology is subdivided into separate branches for convenience of study, though all the subdivisions are interrelated by basic principles. Thus, while it is custom to separate the study of plants, botany, from that of animals, zoology, and the study of the structure of organisms, morphology, from that of function, physiology, all living things share in common certain biological phenomena, for example, various means of reproduction, cell division, and the transmission of genetic material.
So we see how even though biology engages in cross-disciplinary research which takes knowledge from other fields, all those overlapping fields share consensus with the biological principle of reproduction, and none of biology's subdivisions are in disagreement with this principle. While this is not the case with gender theory when it tries to give its cross-disciplinary contributions, since it negates the principle of reproduction when forming its model of sexuality, the two models are incompatible, in much the same way that creationism is incompatible with biology's principle of evolution. Reproduction is called a basic principle of biology, meaning it is universal to all living beings, from molecular reproduction to human reproduction. Next, let's look at the other basic principle of biology: evolution.
Evolution itself is a biological phenomenon common to all living things, even though it has led to their differences. Evidence to support the theory of evolution has come primarily from the fossil record, from comparative studies of structure and function, from studies of embryological development, and from studies of DNA and RNA, ribonucleic acid.
So biology studies life, it has as a principle that life evolves and that all life shares the biological phenomena of reproduction, as well as cell division and the transmission of genetic material. So since all life engages in reproduction, let's look at that word.
Reproduction, process by which organisms replicate themselves. In a general sense, reproduction is one of the most important concepts in biology. It means making a copy, a likeness, and thereby providing for the continued existence of species. Although reproduction is often considered solely in terms of the production of offspring in animals and plants, the more general meaning has far greater significance to living organisms. To appreciate this fact, the origin of life and the evolution of organisms must be considered. One of the first characteristics of life that emerged in primeval times must have been the ability of some primitive chemical system to make copies of itself. At its lowest level, therefore, reproduction is chemical replication. As evolution progressed, cells of successively higher levels of complexity must have arisen, and it was absolutely essential that they had the ability to make likenesses of themselves.
Briefly, let's look at the levels of reproduction from the lowest to the highest. Among the levels of reproduction that exist, there are the following. Starting with molecular replication, there is molecular reproduction, cell reproduction, binary fission. Which of the various kinds of cell division, binary fission is the most common mode? It is the division of a cell into two separate and similar parts, as opposed to multiple fission, some algae, some protozoans, and the true slime molds, Myxomycetes, regularly divide by multiple fission. In such cases, the nucleus undergoes several mitotic divisions, producing a number of nuclei. And finally, we come to the form that interests us: reproduction of organisms.
Reproduction of organisms. In single-celled organisms, e.g. bacteria, protozoans, many algae, and some fungi, organismic and cell reproduction are synonymous, for the cell is the whole organism. Details of the process differ greatly from one form to the next, and if the higher ciliate protozoans are included, can be extraordinarily complex. It is possible for reproduction to be asexual by simple division or sexual.
So we see organisms can reproduce using simple division like the lower levels of life. But it is also with organisms that sexuality begins to be present. And this is true even in the most basic organisms.
Sexuality is present even in primitive bacteria, in which parts of the chromosome of one cell can be transferred to another during mating.
So we see that even primitive bacteria are also engaging in mating as a means to transfer genetic material, and that it's at this point where we can say sex is taking place in the biological world rather than just replication. That is to say, molecules and cells reproduce, but they don't have sex. Sex begins with organisms. Now, Britannica had also mentioned that organisms are capable of asexual reproduction. One of the main arguments used in gender theory is to focus on this issue of asexuality. So let's briefly look more at asexuality.
Multicellular organisms also reproduce asexually and sexually. Asexual, or vegetative, reproduction can take a great variety of forms. Many multicellular lower plants give off asexual spores, either aerial or motile and aquatic, zoospores, which may be uninucleate or multinucleate.
But here is the problem with the gender theory argument. This is prevalent among lower organisms, such as plants, and just as sex begins with organisms, asexuality ends with vertebrates. Britannica states,
among animals, many invertebrates are equally well endowed with means of asexual reproduction. Numerous species of sponges produce gemmules, masses of cells enclosed in resistant cases that can become new sponges.
Further stating,
the highest animals that exhibit vegetative reproduction are the colonial tunicates, e.g. sea squirts, which, much like plants, send out runners in the form of stolons, small parts of which form buds that develop into new individuals. Vertebrates have lost the ability to reproduce vegetatively. Their only form of organismic reproduction is sexual.
So Britannica described vegetative asexuality as not present in vertebrates. There is another form of asexuality rarely found in egg-laying vertebrates called parthenogenesis. The only vertebrates which use parthenogenesis are a few cold-blooded egg-laying vertebrates like fish and reptiles. All other vertebrates which use internal fertilization only reproduce by sex. So sex becomes the dominant form of reproduction as we move from invertebrates to mammals. Mammals have taken a distinct evolutionary path from those of fish and reptiles. This also indicates that the behaviors mammals use during sex by each sex during the process of internal fertilization are unique to each sex, which is a basis for gendered behaviors. So we can argue that gender does begin to manifest itself in vertebrates that reproduce through internal fertilization, since they perform gender roles. While the only non-gendered reproductive behaviors in the animal kingdom happen among invertebrates and a few egg-laying, cold-blooded vertebrates. So having investigated asexual reproduction, what then is sexual reproduction?
Sexual reproduction, the production of new organisms by the combination of genetic information of two individuals of different sexes. In most species, the genetic information is carried on chromosomes in the nucleus of reproductive cells called gametes, which then fuse to form a diploid zygote. The zygote develops into a new individual. Sexual reproduction is the dominant form of reproduction in living beings. Sexual reproduction allows for the reshuffling of genetic material, both within and between individuals of one generation, resulting in the potential for an extraordinary array of offspring, each with a genetic makeup different from that of its parents. In the sexual reproduction of all organisms except bacteria, there is one common feature. Haploid uninucleate gametes are produced that join in fertilization to form a diploid uninucleate zygote.
And this is precisely the crux of the problem with gender theory. If we are going to look at sexuality from a biological point of view, then we are looking at sexual reproduction, which means whatever other creatures in the biological world are capable of. If they are asexual or hermaphroditic, or let's go so far to say as Crash Course does that mushrooms have 20,000 kinds of sexuality, all of those genders serve one purpose and one purpose only: reproduction. In comparison, the various sexuality identities in gender theory have almost no interest in reproduction. Gender theory is about identity, not sexuality. This should mean then that we should not look to gender theory to offer us a model of human sexuality, since it really has nothing to do with biological sexuality, that is, with biological reproduction using the method evolution has developed to reproduce. Further, it should not be considered a biological model of sexuality because of this decoupling from reproduction. If they are going to decouple reproduction from sexuality, they need to also decouple the use of the word sexuality from any discussion of gender theory, because scientifically speaking, it is not a theory pertaining to sexuality. It is a theory pertaining to desires, identity, and social roles. Since it is more interested in the recreational and social aspects of genital stimulation, a better word would perhaps be dalliance, which I will use instead of sex or sexuality when talking about what gender theory is interested in. And this is where I would like to take this analysis. Rather than go point by point explaining the problems with gender theory, look at biological sexuality in humans and clarify what that is and why gender theory is not compatible with it. Many specialized people have gone into detail on the problems with gender theory's arguments and idea of what gender is probably better than I would. I am less interested in discussing gender from a sociological context and more interested here in establishing what human sexuality is from a biological standpoint. I will refer interested viewers to a couple of channels focused on the issue of gender: Dr. Colin Wright, Dr. Thomas Bogadas, and for a more polemic approach, King Critical. What I see in gender theory is a model of human dalliance, not a model of sex or really even gender. A model built on the shoulders of the sexual revolution. What I mean is, with the sexual revolution, sexuality was decoupled from reproduction. And I'm not a Puritan arguing that sex should only be reproductive. Obviously, sex for humans is recreational and relationship building as it is in other mammals. However, after the pill had been invented, which is the evolutionary equivalent of the nuclear bomb, in that with the bomb a power reserved to the sun was in a Promethean act brought to earth by the hubris of man. A power that by natural mechanisms would never take place on Earth was synthetically produced on Earth, so the pill brought a synthetic power never produced by nature. Sex was invented by evolution, and the pill has brought something into the process of sexuality that evolution did not. In all its glorious diversity, sex is the engine that drives evolution. It's the ultimate genetic mixer, shuffling the deck of life to create new and exciting combinations. Think of it like this: every time two organisms reproduce sexually, they're essentially rolling the dice, creating offspring with a unique blend of their genes. This mixing and matching of genes is crucial for adaptation. It's what allows populations to evolve and change over time, responding to environmental pressures and seizing new opportunities. Without sexual reproduction, evolution would be a much slower, more haphazard process. It would be like trying to win a card game with a handful of duplicates. You might get lucky occasionally, but your chances of success are slim. And while this is the most common form of sexual reproduction, nature loves to throw curveballs. While sexual reproduction offers the benefit of genetic diversity, there are times when asexuality has its advantages. Take bacteria, for example. These microscopic marvels reproduce asexually through binary fission, where a single cell divides into two identical daughter cells. It's a quick and easy way to create a whole colony of clones, especially when resources are plentiful and the environment is stable. However, does this give us insight into human sexuality? Bacteria and plants do weird stuff to reproduce that we don't, but plants also use photosynthesis, and that is because they are plants. They are radically different organisms than us. Their ability to photosynthesize tells me nothing about my digestive system or my ability to create energy because we have different biological systems. Nor is vegetative reproduction with no nervous system equivalent to humans. We are rational animals with a highly developed nervous system which gives rise to our complex psychology and which is at the core of our sexual constitution. As mentioned earlier, asexual reproduction is only present in lower life forms, that is, invertebrates and some egg-laying vertebrates. The other form of asexual reproduction which takes place among egg-laying creatures, most notably reptiles and bees, as mentioned before, is parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis is a form of asexual reproduction in which an embryo develops from an unfertilized egg. This process results in offspring that are genetically identical to the mother. Parthenogenesis is common in certain insects, reptiles, and even some fish. Example: Komodo dragons. Komodo dragons, the world's largest lizards, can reproduce via parthenogenesis when no males are available. Female Komodo dragons can lay eggs that develop into offspring without being fertilized by a male. It should be mentioned too that many reptiles also have a unique ability to receive their sex, not from genetics, for example XY or XX chromosome, but from the environment the egg is in. The temperature of the egg determines the sex of the reptile. This is called temperature-dependent sex determination. This, however, is not the case of Komodo dragons, but highlights the differences in sex determination unique to reptiles. None of these forms of reproduction takes place in mammals or vertebrates which use internal fertilization. All mammals use genotypic sex determination systems to determine their biological sex, for example, XY or XX chromosomes.
Furthermore, even in species that have lost sex, sexual behavior and roles persist. Here, we have some lizard erotica. I'm not calling it lizard porn because no one was trying to make a buck from taking these pictures. So we've got a male on top and a female on the bottom engaging in courtship and copulation. And these are pictures from the 80s and black and whites. They're not perfect, but you get the picture. You can imagine how lizards have sex. However, this is Nematophorus. It's a whiptail lizard lineage. And in this lineage, this is one of the very few lineages in vertebrates that actually sometimes goes asexual. And when they go asexual, the sexual behaviors persist. On the right here is an entirely asexual species, which means it's made entirely of females. Because again, remember, what are the gametes? What are the sexes? You can't make a baby with sperm. It doesn't have the cytoplasm. So when species go asexual, they're all female now. They're producing eggs and only eggs, and that's the only kind of organism there is in that species. So on the right, we have Nematophorus uniparens, another whiptail species that's closely related, engaging, that's two females, engaging in what looks like the very same sexual behavior. And indeed, the sexual behavior changes throughout the ovarian cycle. So pre-ovulation, females partake in female typical behavior and receive mounting from other females. And after ovulation, the females switch roles and they adopt male typical behavior and mount other females. So this points out how ancient some of these, some gender can be, some sexuals can be.
But what about hermaphrodites? Take, for instance, the humble earthworm. These wriggly creatures are hermaphrodites, meaning they possess both male and female reproductive organs. They still reproduce sexually, exchanging genetic material with another worm. But they don't have to worry about finding a partner of the opposite sex. Among vertebrates, two forms of hermaphroditism have been observed: simultaneous and sequential hermaphroditism. Simultaneous hermaphroditism happens when some vertebrates possess both ovarian and testicular tissue, and where both types of gametes are functional at the same time. This occurs in a few species of fish. Examples of hermaphroditism: Rivulus marmoratus, mangrove killifish. The mangrove killifish is one of the best-known examples of a vertebrate that is a simultaneous hermaphrodite. This small fish, found in mangrove swamps, has both ovarian and testicular tissue and is capable of producing both eggs and sperm. Remarkably, this species can self-fertilize, making it one of the very few vertebrates capable of doing so. Both eggs and sperm are produced within the same gonad, allowing these fish to reproduce on their own. Sea bass, Serranidae family. Some species of sea bass within the Serranidae family, like the black sea bass, are capable of simultaneous hermaphroditism. Typically, however, they engage in spawning with other individuals. Hamlets, Hyperplectrus. Each individual is capable of functioning as both a male and a female during mating. Hamlets typically engage in a form of reciprocal mating, where each fish takes turns releasing eggs and sperm, ensuring cross-fertilization between partners. Simultaneous hermaphroditism then comes in two forms: self-fertilization. In species like the mangrove killifish, self-fertilization is possible, allowing a single individual to reproduce in isolation. However, this is quite rare among vertebrates. Or reciprocal mating. In other species like the hamlets, simultaneous hermaphroditism allows for mating between individuals, where each partner plays both reproductive roles during the act of mating. This maximizes reproductive opportunities in environments where finding mates might be difficult. This is in contrast with sequential hermaphroditism. While simultaneous hermaphroditism allows an individual to produce both types of gametes at the same time, more commonly vertebrates exhibit sequential hermaphroditism. In this process, an individual changes sex during its life cycle. This can be protogeny, starting as female, then changing to male, for example, many wrasses, or protandry, starting as male then changing to female, for example, clownfish. These fish are born male but can transition to female later in life if the social hierarchy demands it. Fish are a case where hermaphroditic reproduction is observed to be a feature, not a flaw. Some frog species, like the common frog, Rana temperaria, have been observed in controlled environments to exhibit hermaphroditic traits, although this is not the norm. Environmental factors such as pollutants or hormonal disruptions can cause some amphibians to develop both ovarian and testicular tissues, but these cases are typically regarded as anomalies rather than natural forms of hermaphroditism. This has happened in a few other reptiles like turtles and lizards, and even in chickens. These are typically regarded as due to environmentally caused anomalies or developmental abnormalities rather than natural reproductive strategies. Now, gender theory will try to use these examples to say sexuality is diverse, but these animals don't tell us about human sexuality because we are not hermaphroditic. There are no cases of self-replicating human hermaphrodites, nor can humans switch between having egg gametes and sperm gametes. Yes, there are genetic cases of atypical chromosomes called intersex. Intersex people are born with sexual characteristics that are not distinctly male or female, and some may have unusual chromosomes that do not match the typical XX or XY patterns. These variations can affect their ability to reproduce. Still, if they do, intersex individuals still use binary reproductive capabilities depending on their specific sexual characteristics and anatomy.
Evidence that there aren't more than two sexes are against the sex binary because intersex conditions don't result in reproductive systems that can or would or did produce a third or fourth type of gamete. So they would need to produce something like a spurg or a speg in order for this to be, in order for an intersex condition to truly be like a new sex, okay? Again, sex ambiguity is not a third sex, okay? Intersex conditions, if maybe we're all exposed to radiation and future generations, have 50% prevalence of intersex conditions, that still wouldn't mean there's more than two sexes. It would just mean there's a lot of people who are difficult to place at a glance. They have intermediate appearing genitalia. There would still only be two sexes. So the prevalence of intersex conditions has no bearing whatsoever on how many sexes there are. Sex is still binary, no matter how many, the prevalence of intersex conditions.
There are some rare medical and intersex conditions where aspects of both male and female reproductive anatomy may coexist, but these individuals do not self-fertilize or switch between producing eggs and sperm. Two major examples are ovotesticular disorder, formerly known as true hermaphroditism. In this rare intersex condition, individuals may have both ovarian and testicular tissue. In individuals with OTDs, these tissues often do not fully function due to the incomplete development of either or both. This makes it difficult for the tissues to mature into gamete-producing organs. Even if both tissues are present, one is typically underdeveloped, which prevents both gametes from maturing successfully. The production of eggs from ovarian tissue and sperm from testicular tissue is regulated by different hormonal environments. Ovaries need primarily estrogen to support egg maturation, while testes require testosterone for sperm production. Balancing these hormones to allow the simultaneous production of both viable eggs and sperm is nearly impossible. There are very rare reports of individuals with OTDs who have had children. However, to date, there have been no confirmed cases where both types of gametes were functional. That is cases where someone with OTDs produces both types of functional gametes, eggs and sperm, and can switch between fertilizing an egg and releasing eggs the way clownfish do. Androgen insensitivity syndrome, AIS, and other intersex conditions. These conditions involve variations in sexual development, but individuals do not switch between producing eggs and sperm. Instead, they may have atypical development of their reproductive anatomy and secondary sexual characteristics.
So this, I think, has been stated very clearly by Alice Drager. And she said in her book, I think it was Hermaphrodites and the Medical Invention of Sex, when she says hermaphrodites, she means intersex people, so just keep that in mind. So she said that hermaphroditism causes a great deal of confusion, more than one might first appreciate, because, as we will see again and again, the discovery of a hermaphroditic body raises doubts not just about the particular body in question, but about all bodies. The questioned body forces us to ask what exactly it is, if anything, that makes the rest of us unquestionable. So I think that's kind of the distillation of the argument from intersex conditions, saying that some people are intersex, what really is sex. We can't really say anything about anyone's sex if some people are, have these conditions that sort of blur this line. But this might sound like really profound if you don't know anything about what males or females are, but it's just sort of the pseudoscientific woo-woo. It's just completely not true that because some people might, who are at a glance difficult to place in a male or female box, based on their genitalia, that we're all somehow in this, cast into this realm of complete uncertainty. That's just not the case. Most people, like a coin flip, are either male or female. You don't get a coin flip that's 70% heads on a single flip. It's either going to be heads or tails. Maybe you'll get, with a nickel, I think 1 out of every 6,000 flips will land on its edge. That doesn't negate the existence of a heads or a tails. And the prevalence of intersex conditions is about the same prevalence likelihood of a nickel landing on its edge, from 1 in 5,500. So.
These alternative reproductive strategies among organisms, which took a different evolutionary path, highlight the incredible adaptability of life and the diverse solutions evolution has devised to ensure its continuation. But what does this entail about human sexuality? Next to nothing, because we took the path of warm-blooded mammals. The end of the discussion is, do humans have asexual or hermaphrodite potential? And the answer is no. Outliner genetic conditions either pass their genetics with one form of gamete, or the binary other type, or they are unable to reproduce at all. Humans are uniquely exceptional in that we have evolved the most developed nervous system among all life forms, and our brain is a major organ in our sexual adaptation, since sex for us is a psychological experience as well as a physical experience. In humans, for example, the CNS is much more complex. The brain has evolved a highly developed cerebral cortex. The brain of a fish is relatively small compared to body size, typically making up about 0.1% of their body mass. Human brains are much larger relative to body size, about 2% of body weight, and are incredibly complex, particularly in the cerebral cortex, which enables higher-order functions such as complex social behavior, learning, planning, and advanced motor control, all of which are involved in human sexuality. Human cognition is far more advanced, enabling abstract thought, language, complex problem-solving, creativity, and long-term planning, again all used in our reproductive strategies. The human brain supports highly developed social structures, culture, and technology. Humans can reason, reflect on their existence, and communicate through sophisticated languages, abilities. So here's the thing. Humans aren't fish or reptiles. I don't have gills, I'm not cold-blooded, nor can I breathe through my skin like a frog. I don't lay eggs. My respiratory system is not that of a fish, and neither is my nervous system, nor my endocrine system, or my reproductive system. The intricate dance of sexual selection. Now let's get back to the world of sexual reproduction, where things can get more interesting. Because it's not just about finding any old partner and getting down to business. In many species, sexual reproduction is a complex and often competitive affair, driven by a powerful force known as sexual selection. This is the foundation for gender. The mating roles each sex plays is that species' gender. Think of the elaborate courtship displays of birds of paradise, the fierce battles between male elephant seals for dominance, or the intricate dances of insects. These behaviors, as extravagant and seemingly frivolous as they may seem, are all part of the game of sexual selection and the foundation of gendered identity within animal sexuality. While gender, when used by gender theory, is just this blurry category being carved out with a meaning that changes as it serves them. But here's what a very basic idea of what gender is. If I'm trying to reproduce, there are certain behaviors and mechanics that my sex organs require to take place that are unique to each sex. The female in humans is penetrated vaginally, and the male must ejaculate through a series of motions. Those are the simplest, non-society-based gender roles. As a sperm carrier, the male must engage in certain behaviors for reproduction to happen, which are distinct from those that the female must. Those behaviors are biological roles that the gender plays or perform, which are specific to each sex. That is the bare-bones skeleton of gender. Certainly, there are social layers added to that to enable these mating mechanics. These again have their basis in animal selection, where we select mates through the use of social constructs, such as courting, hygiene, dressing a certain way, giving signals, etc., and which may have cultural variations from time and geography. But culture constructs are not going to get a biological man pregnant ever. There is no cultural behavior that will change the foundational behaviors of each biological role for reproduction to happen. Gender behaviors are ultimately grounded in the mechanics of reproduction. As a base, there are certain mechanics of behavior each sex must engage in for reproduction to happen. Those behaviors are unique to each sex and are the beginnings of a separate identity from the opposite sex. This means men wearing kilts in Scotland is completely irrelevant to what gender is at its most basic level. There persists universal behaviors which are foundational for gender, no matter what time, place, or culture you belong to. These rules pertain to intersex as well. They too must obey rules of vaginal penetration and ejaculation, regardless of their chromosomes, and play the role of one of these binary genders to have sex. Nature's bizarre courtship displays. In this arena of sexual selection, males often bear the brunt of the showmanship. They've evolved elaborate ornaments like the peacock's dazzling tail feathers, or engage in risky displays of strength and agility, all to impress potential mates and outshine their rivals. But females aren't just passive observers in this game. They're the discerning judges, carefully evaluating potential suitors based on a variety of factors, including their physical attributes, their courtship prowess, and even their genetic quality. The diversity of courtship rituals in the natural world is truly astounding. Take the male pufferfish, for example, who meticulously creates intricate sand patterns to attract a mate, or the male bowerbird, who decorates his nest with colorful objects, showcasing his artistic taste and resourcefulness. And then there's the male frigate bird, who inflates his bright red throat pouch to an enormous size, like a giant pulsating heart, hoping to woo a female with his impressive display. These bizarre and often comical rituals are a testament to the power of sexual selection in shaping the behavior and appearance of species over evolutionary time. These are biological gender roles. They are diverse, they are elaborate, and they are full of astonishing variety. Nothing about them is limited or restrictive any more than a music scale having 8 notes restricts the beauty and variety that can be produced. These are gender roles in nature that exist in animals, including our cousins, warm-blooded mammals, before we add the addition of social constructs on top of these raw materials. Unleashing human sexuality. Now, let's turn our attention to our own species, Homo sapiens. Because while we share the same basic biological drives as other animals, our relationship with sex is a complex tapestry woven with threads of biology, culture, and individual experience. We're not just driven by instinct, we're capable of conscious thought, emotional depth, and a wide range of sexual desires and expressions. And speaking of complex relationships, let's talk about the sexual revolution. This social and cultural upheaval, which gained momentum in the mid-20th century, challenged traditional norms surrounding sex, relationships, and gender roles. It was a time of great change, a seismic shift in societal attitudes that reverberated across the globe. Think of it as a cultural earthquake, shaking the foundations of centuries-old beliefs and practices. This revolution wasn't just about biology, it was about freedom of expression, about challenging oppressive power structures, re-examining sexuality. It was about questioning the status quo. But it also was the beginning of a new one. The contraceptive pill, with its promise of greater reproductive control, became a symbol of this revolution. An unprecedented event in human history and evolution, no animal has ever controlled its own reproductive capacities. In the millions of years of which life has evolved, the balance of life has always been fragile and delicate. The introduction of such a force is not only culturally disruptive, it's evolutionary disruptive, and an event that has only existed for 50 years. It was only after this body-alienating technology, which disconnects the human body from the evolutionary process and the rhythms of nature that all animals are part of, was opened like a Pandoran box, did the possibility for sexuality to be transformed into dalliance become fully manifest. And with it, new models of human desire decoupled from natural selection, parenting, and lifelong bonding were able to be explored. This further removed sex and one's sexual identity from anything biological, and thus this decadent alienation had facilitated anthropological models like gender theory to develop. We must ask ourselves if this is progress. What are we progressing towards? The sexual revolution had its share of triumphs and tribulations. It paved the way for greater sexual openness and a broader understanding of human relationships. But on the other hand, the sexual revolution also had its critics, who argued that it led to a decline in moral values, an increase in risky sexual behaviors, and a breakdown of traditional family structures. Some felt that it had gone too far, leading to a culture of casual sex and a devaluation of commitment and long-term relationships. Marriage has been redefined, divorce has become normalized, and these aren't unrelated events. Human love has been transformed with the decoupling of natural reproduction from human life. So, where does that leave us? How do we reconcile the biological realities of sex with the complexities of human desire and societal norms? It's a question that has no easy answers, a puzzle with pieces that never quite seem to fit perfectly. Perhaps the key lies in recognizing that human sexuality is not a simple equation, but rather a delicate dance between nature and nurture. Our biology provides the basic framework, the raw materials of desire. The sexual revolution might have been a pivotal moment in human history, but it wasn't an endpoint. It's a journey we're still on, and it's one that requires ongoing dialogue, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions, even those of the revolution itself. The same boldness that led us to challenge the status quo of the 50s needs to now challenge what also was lost, what got thrown away in the haste for change. When sex lost its integration with reproduction, did it also lose its integration with deeper, more meaningful forms of love? Homo sapiens, with our complex emotions, cultural norms, and ever-evolving understanding of sexuality, we're part of this grand narrative, shaped by the same evolutionary forces that have shaped every living creature on this planet. Our biology provides the foundation, the raw materials of desire, but it's our experiences, our upbringing, and our cultural context that mold those desires into something uniquely human.
Competition will forever